Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 45. Who would believe 45 episodes? Frankly, I really thought when we began this project that would last for a little while, answer basic questions, and move on. But indeed, this has become a true journey for myself, and I see also for the listening audience from the questions that keep coming in. I don't really see an end in sight. New questions, as well as going deeper into previous questions, covering the entire spectrum of life. So it's been gratifying, it's been enriching, and I hope you've gained from as much as I have. If you'd like to ask a question, please write to us completely confidentially and anonymously at meaningfullife.com/mylifelive and /dedicate, mylifelive/dedicate, to dedicate any of these episodes. So let us begin with a short, as I've been doing in the previous weeks, a thought on this week's Parsha, and the time we're in from a Chassidic perspective. We're entering now the Parsha Vayishlach. This is the conclusion of the story of Yaakov and Esau, the very powerful Sikha from the Rebbe Vayeshev Tafshin Nun Beis, that last Fabrengen Le'esata that we heard the Rebbe speak to us, where he discusses the entire history as in context of the battle between Yaakov and Esau, starting with Umalum Yemotz, the battle inside Rivka's womb, which in turn is a battle between empires, between nations, between governments, essentially the Jewish people pitted against the world. And we see this battle playing itself out even today. But as the Rebbe makes it clear, Chassidus says that Yaakov at that time, in Parsha Vayishlach, Yaakov Malachim, he went to send messengers to Esau to see, as Chassidus speaks, whether he was nizbared, whether Esau was ready to go to the Geula. Because from Yaakov's perspective, he was ready. And then he saw that Esau is marching with 400 men, he's not ready. And then later when they finally reconcile, with complete heart, with a complete heart or not complete, regardless, Esau then says to Yaakov, come, let us together join and live side by side. And that's where Yaakov says to him, Visnalo li'iti, you go ahead, I will come slowly because the sheep are tender, the children are young. So Rashi, of course, immediately asks the question, is he lying to Esau yet again? He knows he's not going to follow him, he's not coming. So he says, yes, he is. When the Geula will come, they will reside side by side. So the Rebbe explains that after the thousands of years of our work, Yaakov and Esau are finally ready to meet, which means the goyishkeit of the world, the secular and material world, is able to finally integrate and be a dira b'tachtenim for elokus, for the divine. And we're at that threshold. And that classic sikh of Vayeshev Tafshin Nun Beis, which I strongly encourage everyone to learn, because it plays out the whole panorama of history, the entire picture of what transpired from the beginning of time till today, to understand also the Rebbe's perspective on Geula. That sikh lays out that the famous story where the Alter Rebbe opposed Esau, basically. France, having the war with Alexander, Napoleon of France, the Franco-Russo War, in the end of the 18th century, the end of the 17th century, the beginning of the 18th century. The Alter Rebbe wanted France to lose and Alexander to win, as opposed to some other Gedalim that wanted the other way around, because they felt it would be begashmis, physically it would be easier for Jews under Napoleon, because he would offer freedom and fraternity and so on. Whereas under Alexander it was very oppressive, poverty and so on. And Alter Rebbe felt the opposite, that begashmis maybe would be better, but beruchnis it would be a disaster. Because Napoleon, what he offered and promised was essentially freedom, but also freedom of God. A freedom that was based on Ani Kechi ve'etzim yadi, the classic letter, famous letter that the Alter Rebbe wrote to Moshe Meisels. And the Mittler Rebbe wrote even a longer letter, how Napoleon represented the ultimate of yeshus, the ultimate of ego, of self-made man. And therefore, it would have introduced an entire element of complete godlessness and self-centeredness, which is such an epitomizes the Western world today. And therefore he felt that France, and he prayed, and the whole story with the Rosh Hashanah, that he got up early and blew shofar earlier, and he prayed that that should happen. And Beis Rebbe says the other Gadol was the cousin of Samagid, the one who held the other way around. When he got up, he already realized that the Alter Rebbe had prevailed through his shefer. So the bottom line is that then the Rebbe says, a Chiddush Gadol, a Nifla. That was the time of the Alter Rebbe. But now, after the generations, we've learned to refine Tsarfas, France. And the Rebbe alludes to his own work in France, his own living there, that the Rebbeim finally learned to not just avoid it, but to refine it. And he brings the example of Yaakov, after all the years, is ready to re-engage with Esau, because we're ready for the Geula. And the Rebbe even refers to them with Tavshel Lamed Dalet, Simchas Torah, when the Rebbe taught the Nigun, Aderes V'Amunah. So the Rebbe says, so Chassidim learned and took the Nigun of France, the Nigun of France, French victory, and all that it represented, and transformed it into a Chassidish Nigun, Aderes V'Amunah L'chai Elamim. And the Rebbe taught that Nigun, Simchas Torah. And Tavshel Nun Beis, Lamed Ches, the Nun Beis, 14 years later, the Rebbe explained that now is the time to refine and transform that. So the story of Yaakov and Esau in this week's Parsha and their finally reconciliation is essentially the story of where we are today, at the threshold of Geula, that ready to refine and ready to transform and have transformed and ready to embrace the Geula Amitis V'Ashleim. But read the Sikha, it's very powerful. I just want to add 2 points. First of all, the Rebbe, when he was Magia, the Sikha of Chayei Sarah Tavshin Nun Beis, was later called Kuntas, and it was at the time when it was published, it was called Kuntas Shlach No B'Yad Tishlach. The Rebbe speaks about Shlichus. Shlach No B'Yad Tishlach. The Rebbe wrote then the remez of B'Yad Tishlach. Yud Dalet from Tishlach, Tavshin Lamed Ches, and 14 years later, Tavshin Nun Beis. And people mentioned that every 14 years in the Rebbe's Nesius, there was a challenging time. In Tavshin Chav Dalet, which was 14 years from Tavshin Yud, the Rebbe had a minor heart attack, which was really not known at the time. From Chav Dalet to Lamed Ches was another 14 years when the Rebbe had a major heart attack. And Lamed Ches to Nun Beis, of course, was the Rebbe's stroke. So I'm not getting into explaining these things, but the Rebbe was meramis it in the Sikha of Chaisara, Biyad Tishlach, Biyad Yud Dalet from Tishlach, Shlach No Biyad Tishlach, was in Tavshin Nun Beis, when the Rebbe spoke the Sikha about ultimately the ultimate final refinement that comes through our ability to now transform Tzarfas. There's a footnote there that we added that the Rebbe agreed to, that there was that the Rebbetzin had told Rebbetzin Azimov, and now it's just coming, she passed away last year, her husband just passed away a few weeks ago, the Shluchim in France, that Mim Ge'aket und Gezeit, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, we plowed and sowed, and you are taking from that and you're making things grow, blossoming. So it's in the footnote there. The thing I wanted to add was, last week's Parsha we learned about Ufaratz, the Yom of Akeim and Sefein of Negba, which of course is the motto, the theme that the Rebbe so much used to epitomize what Chassidus, what Futza Manesecha Chutza is. Your Futza is like Ufaratzta. Faratzta is the Gematria of 770. Faratzta is also the letters of Tzarfas, as the Rebbe points out there, because France so epitomized that element of spreading Chassidus, as the Rebbe worked there in France on different things in Hatomim and other things the Rebbe worked on in the Igris that we see today for spreading Chassidus. So in Faratzta, the Rebbe in Tavshin Chav Gimel said an interesting thing, Yud Beis Tammuz. So Tavshin Chai, Yud Beis Tammuz, Tavshin Chai, the Rebbe began Kochen Zich in Faratzta. And it began to accelerate until Tavshin Chav. The first 10 years of the Rebbe's Nesius, so Faratzta became the theme, 200 years from the Baal Shem Tov's Yartzeit, and the Rebbe made a very big fuss about Ufaratzta. So it became a new slav, a new stage in spreading Chassidus and spreading Yiddishkeit and so on. So Tavshin Chav Gimel Yud Beis Tammuz, the Rebbe asked the question, why does it say Yom V'Kedem V'Tzafein V'Negba, which seemingly, what order is that? The order should be, you start with Sofin, then Dorim, why east, and then west, and then north, south. And the Rebbe said, because that guf is the in of Faratzta. Going a reis von Agbolas and not going with a Seder. And then I recently heard that Hendel Lieberman, who was an artist of a Chassidish Mishpacha, the Rebbe would encourage him to produce his art. Him and Zalman Kleiman were the two preeminent Chassidish artists depicting the Chassidic world. So Hendel Lieberman once was speaking to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him to make something about Ufaratzta, an image. And he asked the Rebbe, how does he visualize Ufaratzta? So the Rebbe said he visualizes like a big ocean, a big sea, a big body of water. And then you need to build dams and channels to channel. So faratzta is the day of spreading out. But then channeling it, that l'maylam mokim should become part of mokim. Those are not the Rebbe's words, but it's interesting how the Rebbe visualized that. So that's, I believe, a good beginning, especially now we're in the month of Kislev, getting closer to, we are already getting closer to Tes Kislev, Yud Tes Kislev next week. The spreading of Chassidus, Chutza Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. So I think it's appropriate a time to embrace that mission, which is, of course, the whole purpose of this program, which is Chassidus Applied, MyLife Chassidus Applied, to use it in the fullest sense of the word. Faratzta Yom V'Keim V'Tzafein V'Negba. We saw last week's Kiddush HaShluchim, how literally they're Shluchim, literally in the east to the west, and north to the south, in every corner of the globe. Now our job is to take those beachheads, those fronts, and really use it to the fullest extent of conquering everything that we can conquer with Yiddishkeit, with Chassidus, in this sense of the word. At the same time that it's l'maylam hagbolas of faratzta, to also bring it into the channels that existence can contain it all, bli gvul and gvul all together. With that said, let us move on to a particular topic, some follow-up, and as well as new topics. Let's begin with some of the topics I did not have time to address last week, and then also cover some of the new topics. Admitting you're wrong and working on ourselves. It's easy to blame the world and be critical of others, but what about looking at ourselves and recognizing when we are in the wrong? Can we be objectively introspective and admit that we need to fix something within? How exactly does one go about zeroing in and correcting a particular character flaw? Is there a certain time during davening when we should focus on this? Are there guidelines to dealing with people who are not willing to look at themselves objectively? So this captures a series of many questions that came in, and I'll read some of them now in more detail, but this was the gist of them all. Question 1. I would like to express my great appreciation for the way you begun the last episode with a practical and relevant application of the 4 levels of light, referring to, I believe, episode 43. I hope that you'll be able to do something like this in each episode. In this vein, can you please explain, after having read the commentary from the Kohos Chumash on the words, something's wrong here, on the positive meaning of the words Asher Stumim Plishtim, which I will include here right now. So Plishtim comes from the meaning Plishtim, that's Stumim Plishtim, that it's closed up, locked up. And then as the question, which as you will see is a fundamental question, the one that I never got any clear understanding while in yeshiva. So he now gives the pasuk and the interpretation from Chassidus from the Kohos Chumash. The pasuk says, talking about Yitzchak, he redug the wells of water that had been dug in the days of his father Abraham. And this is a quote from the Chumash, the Chassidus in it. As explained in the overview, digging wells alludes to the process of self-refinement, prerequisite to integrating divine revelation. The Philistines succeeded in blocking up Abraham's wells because his methodology in spreading divine awareness was antithetical to that exemplified by digging wells. He merely inspired others but did not uncover their inner well springs of goodness. In contrast, Isaac's methodology in spreading divine awareness was perfectly exemplified by digging wells. He made people take a candid look at themselves, forcing them to confront their psychological blocks standing in the way of living the divine life, thereby uncovering their hidden goodness. He not only inspired others, but he effected change in them. Therefore, the Philistines could not block up his wells. Spiritually, the Philistines, Plishtim, represent unbridled materialism. The root of the word for Philistine, Palash, means to penetrate, to break through borders. The Philistines' blocking up of Abraham's wells alludes to the victory of unbridled hedonism over godly inspiration. We often experience this dynamic during prayer when we pray and meditate. We dig wells by clearing away the emotional and mental dirt that has blocked up the flow of fresh water extant within our souls. But when we conclude our prayers and re-enter the world of our mundane affairs, the inspiration of prayer vanishes. The well has once again been blocked by our inner Philistines, our ingrained relish for material satisfaction. This happens if we fail to direct our inspiration during prayer toward correcting a particular character flaw, opting rather to revel in our uplifted state of inspiration. In contrast, when we focus on improving a specific character trait while praying, we effect a change in ourselves, enabling us to retain our commitment and inspiration even after re-entering the material world. Our wells are no longer at risk of once again becoming blocked up. And he gives some sources here, Sefer Amorim Kuntresim, Volume 2, page 800, Kutei Sichos, Volume 15, page 194, and Si Tere'er 17AC, Kutei Sichos, Volume 1, pages 27, 29. Okay, a piece of Chassidus, which now the challenge is to apply, which I assume this is what he's going to be asking. So therefore my question is, how exactly does one go about zeroing in and correcting a particular character flaw during davening? And how does one do that as we journey through the course of the various sections of, say, Shachris? Okay, so Avram is basically Momayla Lamata, and therefore doesn't really penetrate. Thus the Philistine could block it. Yitzchak represents the Aveda Momata Lamayla. He didn't just uncover the well in the well springs, but he made people, allow them to introspectively look at themselves and therefore refine from within. The question is, how is that done during davening in a personal way, in a practical way? Well, there's a mimer which I'd like to refer to from Rav Hillel Parasher. It was recently published in some different places. It's called Maimer Dibra Maschel Inyan Hatfila V'Hizbonus. And he refers there to a question and answer that he received from the Mittler Rebbe. So let me just read it. He says, Inyan Hatfila V'Hizbonus Shekoidem Aleh. Shamaiti Madmur. Avgam, he's talking about the Mittler Rebbe. Shemitchilet Tzorech L'Hizbonus B'Seder Ishtalshlus. That in the beginning, when you listen, he heard from the Mittler Rebbe, that in the beginning you have to contemplate on Seder Ishtalshlus, the cosmic order, B'derech Prat, in detail, to the point that everything, all the pratim, all the details should in a sense be zeroed in on, and to become botl el klal, that everything focuses to the klal, v'zeu kedem atfilah. So the idea is to think of the details and then show how they're all part of one bigger objective. That's before davening. And then when you actually daven, you have to pray with Pirush HaMilas, Pasha teaching the words. For Oz Mamela, and then automatically Lo Yaster Kavonis Pirush HaMilas al Kavonis HaKlolis. And then automatically there won't be a contradiction between the intention of the specific details in davening and the Kavanah Klolis and the general intention, which is Elov Levade, which is only to God Himself. V'zeho Yetshuva al Shalosi, writes Rab Hillel. This was an answer on my question to the Mittler Rebbe. My shaykhs, Kavonos Pirush HaMilas, what's the connection between the specifics of the Pirush HaMilas, the words that we actually say in davening, word Pirush HaMilas, Pasha word by word? Kumay Baruch Sha'amar Radlo. So Chassidus explains, Baruch Sha'amar, we have to focus on Radlo, Reisha D'Leis Yada, the highest levels of Keser, Atik. Li'in HaBitl, the B'chinas Elikus, to the bitl that one has to have to godliness. So he asked the Mittler Rebbe a question. You find in Chassidus, like the Siddur Imdach, the Siddur of the Mittler Rebbe, which is based on the Mamorim of the Alter Rebbe that he collected to explain davening. You find Chassidus all kinds of explanations. Like one example, Baruch Shamar is Radlo. Shema Yisrael has a level. Shema Nesra. Everyone is a level, a particular level in Seder Shtalshlus. So the question is, what's the shaykhus of the Pirush HaMilas when you read davening is details. What does that have connected, and all these levels that we're discussing, with the main kavanah, which is bitl elikus? Essentially, you could get so focused on the details and you forget that there's a God. Or you forget that the main focus is that you should be subjugated to a higher power, to a higher authority. That was his question. So all these explanations are very good when you learn it and you study it, so you want to understand the whole Seder Shtalshlus, but does it not distract you from the kavanah klolis of a love? So that's what the Mittler Rebbe answered. What did he say? He said that first you have to, before davening, that's when you focus on the details. Baruch Sha'amar is Radlo, and all the other details of Seder Shtalshlus. But during davening, that's when you have to focus on the Pirush HaMilas and focus how they connect you to the Elikus. So in other words, there's two aspects to this approach. One is when you focus on a particular detail. Another is that you're focusing on the Eibishter. The famous expression, Ani mispal l'dazeh hatinuk. What does that mean? One of the Mekubalim who explained that every part of davening refers to another dargan ishtalshlus. So he was told by one of the Rishonim, he said that Tzemach Tzedek brings in Derech Mitzvah, Ani mispal l'dazeh hatinuk. I don't know about all these levels and all these stations. I focus straight on im cholech afatzdi, on Atzmus itself. Like a child. What is a child? A child doesn't know about Atzilus and about Bria. It talks about God. But since now we have an explanation that the details one has to do before B'derech Prat, and their focus is how it's all focused toward one kavanah. Then when you actually go and say the Pirush HaMilis, you will not forget the kavanah klolis of what the whole point of it is. Why am I mentioning this? Because in answering the question, it comes down to this. The main focus of davening is Aveda Shabalev, serving God. Like last week's Pasha, we read about the Yaakov Avinu climbing the ladder. The ladder represents tefillah. You pour out your heart to God for whatever your need. Midaraisa, tefillah is when you have needs. Bakosha sracha, when you have needs. But tefillah is about essentially focusing everything toward the Eibishter. But tefillah also has details. We bless for Refa Chelim, we bless for Refuah Shlema, we bless for Parnosa, all the different blessings in Shemoneh Esrei for different needs. But there's a point where the needs and the kavanah klolis, which is the intention that is for God, do not contradict each other. So in answering the question about a character flaw, when you go into davening, before you daven, you're supposed to learn. You're supposed to shein, prepare yourself, put yourself in the mind space. Focus on something that's a specific character issue you want to address. And a good way to do that is by taking, let's say, the midas, chesed, through malchus. So we know they're also made up 7 times 7, chesed shebe chesed, gvura shebe chesed, and identifying a particular area where you want correction, where you want to improve. Let's say you have a short fuse, anger issues. Let's say you have impatience. Let's say you're being very stingy. Or maybe the opposite, you just don't know when to stop to give. We have all kinds of character flaws that all of us have in our behavior. And you want to correct it. So before davening, that's when you're really supposed to think about it all. Think about the details and think, I want to fix this all. And it's all in the kavanah to what? To serve Eibishter better. To be more focused, to be able to serve our mission in this world in a better way. Once you have that akdamah, where the detail, the flaw, is connected to your intention to correct it, and to correct it for a higher purpose, then when you daven, and you daven even on a simple level, reading the Pirush HaMilis, whether you know the Chassidus in it or you don't know the Chassidus in it, it is not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction to the bitl of Elikus, because you, before davening, have connected the two. So the most important thing is to set your mind to it, focus on it, and during davening, pour your heart out and ask. Now, obviously, davening is not focusing just on your character flaws. Davening has a lot more to it. You have to focus on what it says in the words. But within that, you can also have the kavanah, the intention to repair something within ourselves. And this is the Aved of Yitzchak. You know, Teira Aved Gemilas Chasadim. So the 3 pillars, Avram was Chesed, Gemilas Chasadim, Yaakov is Teira, and Yitzchak is Aved, Tefillah, Gvura. So Yitzchak's Aveda is Tefillah, which is what? Digging the wells, in a way, like he said, in a way the Plishtim cannot block it. Because when you focus on your flaws, then you ultimately repair it in a way that nobody can stop it. If you just bring Mamshech Eir, and you just daven and you say, you know what, I hope for the best, and I'll soak myself, I'll vaken, and I'll immerse myself in all kinds of holy things. So it can have an effect, but it's not going to necessarily be a permanent effect. So the key is this element of both taking the prat and the klal together, joining them together and focusing on that specific before the davening. So then when you daven, you're able to allow the kavanah of the Pirush HaMilis to affect you in the entirety for the purpose of ultimately serving God better, which makes you a healthier person and with healthier relationships. Okay. So this was a shtickl Chassidus. I hope I did justice to it to some extent. If there are further questions, please let me know. Let's go to the next question. Next question is, focusing on the negative. It's a good segue. I married the best guy less than a year ago. Bal Tshuvas am I, and everything we argue or don't see eye to eye on something. I think maybe we didn't date long enough. Or maybe we were too naive in dating. Or maybe we should have done the secular thing of dating for a year before and really know who we are marrying. He said he's Chabad. So am I. Well, his Chabad is totally different than mine. He doesn't want to say V'yitn l'cha with me Motzei Shabbos. He said he has seen other holy people say it alone, so he prefers to say it alone. He consults people in his life for decisions, but doesn't have a mashpia per se. He reads mimers of the Alter Rebbe, but not of our Rebbe. He learns alone all day and is very resistant to my suggestions of a chavrusa. He's a kind-hearted person who leads a Jewish life and wants a Jewish family. And we do have moments where we laugh and get along as long as I am not focused on his deficiencies. Is this normal? I don't want to think I married the wrong person or sold myself too short, and I want us to be happy. Thank you. Well, my first question to you would be, do you have a mashpia? And have you discussed this with your mashpia? Because being that I'm not there and I don't know the two individuals, it's hard to comment and understand the dynamic. It takes two to tango, and it could very well be that your attitude, I'm speaking to the questioner here, may not be the right one. If you both stood under a chuppah, there's God is the third partner, and maybe you have to figure out how to find the middle ground and not necessarily try to impose on your spouse your way of looking at things, even if you feel they're correct. So I would advise that you go speak to your mashpia, and then maybe all three of you, your husband, and the mashpia or his mashpia, or some way get together and review the issues here. I do not see here necessarily elements that should be a major problem. Saying v'yitn l'cha, at most it's a custom, it's a nice thing, but I do not see that as being the foundation. Whether your husband should be your chavrusa, also not necessary. It all depends on the dynamic. Maybe there's a reason your husband doesn't want to be a chavrusa. So I do not think that it's good to impose standards of what you would call Chabad, what he calls Chabad. Maybe you're both wrong. Maybe you're both right. Maybe you're focusing on different interests and so on. The point of the matter is, the goal is always to look at yourself. It's very easy to criticize other people. Look at yourself, find someone you can speak to, and objectively review what you see about yourself, about the other person. And maybe you may have issues with just finding critique in everything you see. Again, I don't want to pass any judgment in any given way. I wouldn't pass judgment even if I met you. But especially not without that, my point is that it's very hard to comment. I decided to read this letter because I'm sure people have different issues. Any issues you have in marriage, especially if they feel there's an incompatibility regarding spiritual, religious matters, can and most often can be resolved. They sometimes reflect the differences on other matters that you don't write about. There's matters that are matters of intimacy, sometimes financial issues, personality issues. It's usually not religious or spiritual issues per se that cause two people to have true tensions. They could be good smokescreens for other issues between the parties. So between the lines, I read that there may be other issues, maybe there aren't. I don't want to make a monster out of nothing. The issue whether you argue, don't see eye to eye, maybe we should have dated long enough, we didn't date long enough, or maybe we're too naive in dating. First of all, that's water under the bridge. That's the past. You're not going back to the dating process. You have to take what you have. And you probably have a lot of beautiful things, and learn how to focus and growing and learning of the tools. I also sense here a lack of tools, almost an immaturity in the tools of how to communicate. If you're going to go into in a situation where you complain to your husband, to your spouse, I want this, and he says, no, I don't. Clearly you're going to have a head-on collision. Maybe it has to be approached much differently, much more with gentleness, with femininity, with warmth, in a way that's not confrontational, etc., etc. Like to say, he reads my Maimonides with the Alter Rebbe and not of our Rebbe. Something, the Alter Rebbe and the Rebbe are one. So I'm not sure what's the problem exactly. And whether you should be the one telling him which Maimonim he should learn. You should be happy he's learning Maimonim. See, things like that to indicate to me that there's more going on here than meets the eye. And the most important thing is not just to do it on your own and just to create your expectations and then just demand. Usually the expectations may not be accurate. Demanding is definitely not an approach. And the key is to find somebody that can just help you lighten up, chill out, and figure out a way to love each other and build upon that. Remember, the healthiest thing in relationships, think of it like watering flowers, especially men to women. You want something the best way is to do it through love. Think of a flower. If you want to make a flower grow, what's the best way? You could tug at its roots, at its stem, pull its petals, but you're not going to get it to grow that way. The way to do it is to water it, to nurture it, to love it. And that love creates the flower automatically blossoms. This is especially true from men to women. Men often want things from their wives. The best way is water. Chabed ishte yesim gufe. A man should always honor his wife more than himself, more than his own body and his own bodily needs. When you honor, when you respect and you love, you'll get the most out of that. When you demand and you insist and you pull and you try to pressure, you usually get the least. This is true, especially men to women, but it's also true the other way around. Love, kindness, and affection, these are the ways that you really get the most out of each other. And if there's an issue that needs to be addressed, find someone to speak to, and so on. Good. Next question. At times when the questions are about how to deal with someone who may not be willing to follow the guidelines and clarifications that you make, you clarify that, of course, the person needs to be willing to look at themselves objectively. Yes, as I just said that, right. Are you able to help people with this inyan how to look at themselves objectively? Especially someone who does not have a mashpia whom they feel comfortable revealing their innermost struggles. Is there hope for someone who has difficulty with this? Is there a way you, Rabbi Jacobson, can reach out to help people who have trouble admitting they are wrong and need to fix their outlook? If not, maybe you have guidelines to help the people who are struggling within themselves when dealing with people who are not willing to look at themselves objectively. This is something I'm working on to help myself and others to do. Do you have suggestions or guidelines for this? Thank you. Well, that's very kind of you to suggest that I have the way to help people, reach out to people to help admitting. We all have our blind spots, including myself. Hasheichid ya'aver einech chachamim, the bias, bribery, blinds the eyes of the wise, salav divrei tzadikim, and it distorts the words of the righteous. Everyone, no one's immune to that. Avos atzmei. So we all have our blind spots. The point is whether you have the integrity and the honesty to acknowledge it. Not like the guy that I once met and I asked him, do you have any blind spots? He says, yes, but I know what they are. That's not the definition of a blind spot. The definition of a blind spot is that you don't know where they are. There's also the classic analogy they give, a chelim story that is used in a lot of healing situations. A guy's looking for his keys at night. He's looking and looking. So a neighbor drives by and comes out and says, okay, let me help you look. Where did you lose them? Let's retrace the steps. So he points 100 yards away. I lost them over there. So he said, so why are you looking here? He said, because here's where the light is shining. We often look for solutions to problems exactly where the solution is not. We look where it's comfortable. We look where it's not painful, where it doesn't hurt us, where the light is shining. Sometimes you have to look where the light is not shining, and that's exactly what subjectivity does. It blinds you. You cannot see. You just have to acknowledge that. The concept of aseh l'charav, the idea of a mashpia, is precisely that, someone that simply does not have your subjectivity. They have their own subjectivity, but regarding you, they're not subjective. So they can look at something and see it very differently than you do. The hardest thing is to accept that, because we convince ourselves, especially when we're smart, that we're smarter than everybody. Yes, we need an objective perspective. So you hear the objective perspective, and you often disagree, or you won't say it openly, or you say, you agree mostly, you don't get all of it, because the person you start convincing yourself doesn't know all the nuances, as you do. But you also are the subjective, like he also doesn't know your subjective nuances. So that's the whole point of integrity, of really listening, to being able to just hear another opinion. I don't know if you can force anyone to listen if they want to block themselves. Often they have to hit rock bottom, or something has to happen that shakes them up. God forbid. I'm not wishing it upon anyone. But to suggest there's something you can say to somebody and show them to admit that they need to fix their outlook, in my experience, it's hard to imagine that. Often you have to find an opening, as I said earlier, with kindness. Sometimes you have to be a little harsher. But if it's done with love and non-judgmentalism, where a person doesn't put up his guard and all the defense mechanisms, then it's far easier. And you see this throughout the letters of the Rebbe. And Chassidus, any intelligence, tells you that you have to find an independent individual, an objective one that can help you get clarity. And unless someone's receptive to that, they feel the need for it, or they have the honesty within themselves, the integrity to do that, I don't find it's possible to just say anything and just say, you know what, hey, by the way, maybe you should go to someone objective. They say, yeah, that's a great idea. This is true when it comes to medical matters, psychological matters, emotional matters, personal matters. Obviously, the closer to home it is, the harder it is sometimes to go and reach for help. There's shame involved, there's pride, there's minimizing, denial, saying I could solve it on my own. So, you could help someone that can help themselves. But I will say the good news is this. That I think is also good news, but the better news is this. I've seen my own experience in my life, just from doing this, MyLife Applied, Chassidus Applied. I've seen literally people who initially may have been very close, but something opens up. You know, you have children, you have a spouse, you have a shlichus, you have a different objective, and even if you're blinded and you're hurt and so on, if it's said in the right way, people open up a bit, and then they open up more, and maybe they may struggle, they may kick and scream, but done right, you could end up opening up a lot of channels, even though initially you may have seen the person is blocked. So I would say there's no such thing as a person that's completely blocked. You can't force anyone, but you have to try. You knock on the doors, you do it with kindness, with gentleness, this approach, that approach. I told many episodes ago the story of Schallenberg Gordon, Reb Schallenberg Gordon from Maplewood, New Jersey, who asked the Frierdiker Rebbe about rebuking and reprimanding someone who was doing something wrong. What should be the attitude? And the Frierdiker Rebbe gave him the analogy, because he traveled through Turkey, of the Turkish bathhouse, schwitz. That you go there, what do you see? People go into a schwitz, into a hot room, a sweat house, a sweat bath, whatever it's called, and they're there. It opens up the pores, and the dirt oozes out. And then they climb up higher because the heat rises, and that opens up even more of the pores, and even more subtle toxins seep out of the person. Then they come out from the schwitz, and they pay an attendant to slap them with this eucalyptus leaves that has some type of way of really, regenerating, gets your blood going, the circulation, and has some type of exhilaration about it. I've never tried it, but that's what I hear. And the story, of course, indicates, it tells that. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, that's the lesson. The first thing you have to do is warm someone up. Then you have to elevate them and make them even warmer. And then they will ask you to slap them with the leaves. In other words, there's always an opening, but it has to come with love. You start confronting people. Who are you to confront? They get defensive, pride, shame, all the other factors. So I have no doubt that everybody can be reached. If you're not reaching them, maybe you have to do the exact opposite of what your temptation is to do. Your temptation is to grab them and wring them in the neck. You know? Maybe what you have to do is restraint. Pull back, let someone else talk to them and show them. And show them and open and channel and so on. Objectivity is something that takes time, and most importantly, you have to give a person fresh air. And sometimes the person who wants the other person to listen to an objective person may be part of the problem, because they keep seeing your demands, what you want, you keep on putting that much pressure, it just closes them up from hearing anybody. As you keep telling them, go to an objective person, that alone blocks them from going because they have a battle with you. So maybe sometimes you have to exercise the opposite, restraint, and do the exact counterintuitive thing that you want to do. Show kindness, even in face of adversity and so on. And that often allows at least an environment where the person may be receptive to hearing someone, instead of just being embattled and constantly defending themselves and having to deal with attacks and so on, critique. Next question. Secular studies. This is a topic that was addressed a number of episodes back. I don't recall which episodes. I believe it was episodes 24 to 28, actually. Yes, now I see it's written down here. Episodes 24 to 28. I listened to your classes on secular education, although you explained in lots of detail the Rebbe's position. I still need more clarity. The system in my son's yeshiva is that there is Kodesh an entire day, Limudei Kodesh. Some years the teachers incorporate a little math into the schedule. The thing is that children don't learn in any language how to write or read. Eventually, the children need to know how to write and read English because they have to understand and write tests and just how to get around. Sometimes, to me, it seems pathetic, but the teachers will write in Yinglish, Aleph Beis, the English language, so that children who can't read will be able to understand the test. The way I've been dealing with that is that I teach my sons how to read and write a little math at home through workbooks and games on the computer or iPad. This year there's an after-school program twice a week for one of my sons, so I'm sending him to that. It's always been a struggle to get my children to do English and math. They say, Tati never learned it, it's boring, what do I need it for, etc. By the time my oldest turned bar mitzvah last year, I quit the nudging. He's able to do basic math, read a book, write not too well, but enough to get around. I feel that as long as my boys have the core, then if they ever need to build from there, they have where to start from. As an aside, my husband never learned Limudei Chayil, and Baruch Hashem is very successful working as an assistant rabbi in a modern Orthodox shul. However, when he writes emails, many times he asks me for the spelling of words. He can only write capital letters, etc. In math, although he doesn't have specific skills, he's quicker than me in calculations. I feel that my husband was very lucky to land in this position, but I realize that I don't know what the future will hold with my boys. Also, when he was growing up, his father spoke to him in Yiddish. The school taught in Yiddish, tests were oral, etc. He didn't have as much of a need to learn English for actual school. My question is, am I doing the right thing by insisting that my sons have a language that they can get around in and know how to do basic math to get around? Am I sending them the wrong message? I feel like since they resent it so much, it's a good thing. This way they are inclined to Kodesh anyway. Question 2. In regard to the Rebbe's Shitta of teaching kids English, I rewatched episodes 24-28 and haven't seen a clear answer. Well, that's not correct. There was a clear answer. The main focus was secular education for adults. The question I pose is the following. If both parents are bringing up their child with the idea that we have a purpose and mission in this world to reveal godliness, etc., why is there an issue if the child, even from a very young age, learns reading, writing, and math? It only seems normal. Seemingly, if taught properly, it shouldn't deter his or her mission and hashkafa as a chassid. It's a time-sensitive question for me. If you can please reply at your earliest convenience, it would be greatly appreciated. Okay. So first of all, I did mention it there. The Rebbe is different. The age 9 and other ages the Rebbe referred to, Simchas Torah and Yud Shvat Tovshin Tezvov. But I will say the following. Though I discussed this at length, and I would refer you back to those episodes 24-28, it comes down to this. Definitely the idea of seeing secular education as an end in itself, a tachlis, is a klippa. It distracts a person from the purpose of their existence on this earth. To see it, on the other hand, as simply a tool chest, like a screwdriver and a hammer and so on, obviously is the right approach. The question, at what age do you want to expose this to your child? So the Rebbe refers there to the youngest age, 9 years old, some say a little younger. The point of the matter is, it definitely seems to be a case-by-case thing and not something you can just write broad strokes and say everyone is equal. Absolutely, in this world, we should know how to write, we should know how to spell, we should know how to sign our name, we should know the basic skills. If it's done in the context of a person knowing fully what their purpose is, I don't see any problem with an element of tutoring, as every parent sees the need. I would leave this up to parents. I would not have schools impose it on parents. Parents are the ones that are obligated for their children's education, and they're talking different Chassidic levels. And a parent wants to follow the way the Rebbe exactly spells it out, they should have the right to do so. At the same time, from a parent's point of view, there is a responsibility to make sure that your child can function in this world. Do you must have this whole secular education to function? Absolutely not. It's very clear. There are many people who are very successful. But basic tools, for example, teaching your child how to swim is a chiyuv. Teaching your child how to, riding a bike is not a necessity, but we do that. We teach our children tools. We teach our children basic things. They're not necessarily all limudei kodesh. If you see limudei chayil in that context, then it's not even a context, then maybe it shouldn't even be called limudei chayil or chachmas chitzenis. It's tools. It's like showing your child, here's how you're going to the store now, you're going to buy something for $1, you're going to get change of 45 cents. So 55 cents, the object calls, the dollar is, bring back 45 cents change. That's called studying limudei chayil. That's called studying basic addition and subtraction. It all comes down to how much you create value and focus on and worship even those studies. These are tools and they're meant to be exactly that. Or to look at the red light or green light when you learn to drive or when you walk a street. Is that limud chel? That's the ways of the world. You're learning about green lights and red lights. Taka not yichudei law and even not yichudei tata, but it's the basic elements of getting right. How to dress, how to say hello. There's an etiquette involved. This would not go into that category. It's the category of utilities that we all need, tools and utilities to live in this world. And I believe that parents should definitely allow their children to have that, not feel handicapped or feel diminished. Do not believe that Rebbe was referring to that at all. Rebbe was referring to schools, was referring to the worshiping of it by parents, the worshiping of tachlis, of career, and so on. I believe that's the answer that one has to apply. And again, case by case, speak to mashpia. But that's the general attitude. Okay, let's move on. Infertility. Okay. I've heard all of your Chassidus Applied classes, and I was wondering, what does Chassidus say to people who are not blessed with physical children yet? We live in a community where it's the norm to get married, and within the first year or two, a baby is born. We were not yet blessed, and it's very hard, especially when many of my friends and family are Baruch Hashem blessed. There isn't really any support system. People are too uncomfortable to deal with this topic and not sure how to approach another. Am I allowed to be mad at Hashem? Is it after all in His power when He blesses a union with a healthy child? Question number 2 in this same regard. I suffer from male infertility, and my wife and I, despite repeated IVF attempts, have not been blessed with children together. After much joint discussion and contemplation and a consultation with our Mashpia and Rav, we have stopped IVF. Baruch Hashem, we have an amazing marriage, love spending time with each other, and feel very blessed. We have taken up hiking and share other experiences we've had less time to do or we to have children. Nevertheless, we share a deep pain that at least without a miracle, we will not be blessed with children. Jewish life is built around the family, and it can't help but saying that we lack that part of the experience, both in our lives and as we relate to our friends. In a way, Frum life was not built but for the childless couple. What was the Rebbe's perspective on infertility and how it affects the Frum lifestyle? Well, this is a very sensitive topic, and I want to not in any way sound callous, God forbid. So my heart goes out to anyone that has to deal with this issue. You know, not being in this situation, thank God myself, it's hard to put myself in someone's shoes. And yet I will try to address it from the perspective from the Rebbe and from the perspective of Torah. I will say I did write a series of articles on the topic. If you go to meaningfullife.com and look for childlessness or infertility, I have a few articles on the topic that may be helpful to you or to anyone else that's dealing with this, or people who are friends with others that are dealing with this challenge. It goes into the deepest part and core of our psyches, because God did create us, and in ways that we should be able to bear children. Prudavu milos haaretz, the ability to perpetuate, and especially when you see your friends and family and siblings and so on, it can be extremely painful, both for women and men. Maybe women in a more revealed way because of their obvious nature to be mothering, but a man as well, a father as well, and especially as you write the Frum lifestyle, family, Shabbos, Yom Tov, so much around the children. So it's an extremely painful topic, but I don't want to shy away from it, and let's address it. Only God knows His mysterious plan. None of us know why we're blessed to be on earth, why we're blessed with the children we were given, the amount of children, what type of children, and why some of us are deprived or given children that are very great challenges, whether it can be physical challenges, psychological ones. But at the end of the day, it's God's big plan. And if you're here on earth and you've done everything you can do to have a child, and you continue doing it, yes, you absolutely wait for a miracle. We have the Torahs filled with the barren women, starting with Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah was not in that situation, who all began and they prayed and prayed Chana for children. And we see how they poured out their hearts and souls, and it's all documented. So number one is we never give up. And we do whatever it takes, both from a spiritual point of view, praying, as well as a physical point of view, as long as it's halachically permitted, which has to be run by a Rav and so on. We do what it takes. And you hear stories, people after 10 years, 20 years, have a child. And not to ever underestimate that the same God, with all his mysterious ways, can also bless us, can open up the channel, can open up the womb. And Lag Ba'emer Chassidim would especially go, Mitla Rebbe would do Meifsim, especially regarding children, it says in Hayem Yem. The Rebbe, of course, blessings and blessings. But then, like in every situation, you do everything you can, and God forbid, God does not fulfill the request. Never think that you're in any way diminished or less. The Zohar says that when a couple loves each other, and they have a spiritual and they have a physical union, a sacred union together, they're intimate together, every time a soul is born, a soul is created. Every yichud yields a soul. However, sometimes your dischus is to come into a body on earth, but lamaila, always a soul is created. That's why people even beyond the childbearing age continue to have intimacy. Adam, Avram and Sarah had intimacy even though they did not have a child till Yitzchak years later. The Zohar says these are not in vain. Every time there's a sacred union between husband and wife, a neshama emerges from it. And if there's zeicha, the neshama will come down to earth. The second thing the Rebbe emphasizes is the concept of v'shenanten levanecha ela talmidim. That sometimes, not that it can replace it completely, but the truth is, you can have a biological parent who may not be as close to you as your spiritual or teacher, who can shape and change your entire life. As we learn from the Pasuk in Bamidbar, Ela told us, Aaron and Moshe. And suddenly you hear about Elazar and Samar, the sons of Aaron. So they were biological sons. So Rashi, the Medrash says, Kol HaMalamed is Ben Chaver, anyone who touches his friend's child, Torah, is MyLife Kosov. The Torah considers as Ki'ilu Yolda, like you gave birth to him. This isn't just a nice, cute statement. And I'm not saying it should replace it, but often the Rebbe emphasizes people who have challenges in this area is to focus in matters of education, not necessarily formal in schools. It could be also finding students, finding people you influence. And above all, I have to mention cannot neglect to mention the Rebbe himself. The Rebbe and the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka were not blessed with physical children, and yet all the children were theirs. The Rebbe established not just Shivas Hashem, but every chassid, everyone that came the Rebbe's way was the Rebbe's child, as the Rebbe's teacher. Some people consider the Rebbe much more of a father than their own biological father. Is this a consolation? We're not talking about consolation. We're talking about taking what God gives us, whether we understand it or not, and doing the best we can. At the same time, yes, it's sad that we don't have support groups, but lately there are groups where you can meet and find others, find moral support, strength, and find people to talk to. And these have a tremendous asset. I find people who are dealing with these challenges, because besides the physical challenge, besides the personal sense of loss, there's also the element of emotional loneliness and emotional pain. The emotions, feeling inadequate, feeling that I am not fulfilled, and so on. And it's important to have groups. There are groups. If you want to contact us, I could help you find them. I don't think it's that difficult. They're out there. Unfortunately, there are more than one person that's dealing with these challenges. With all the medical breakthroughs and miracles, we still have this challenge. Above all, I want to say, I want to bless anyone who's dealing with this, a bracha from the depths of my heart. The Eibusher should bless and open up the wife's womb, and should bear children, Chassidic, healthy, and children, begashmis and beruchnis, Yiddish Chassidic children. But above all, first having the child itself. And never give up. People's blessings matter. People's support matters. And to do whatever is possible to maintain a positive attitude. Again, this is not a complete answer. I don't feel at all adequate. But at least I said something about it, something that we learn. We get strength from those that before us. As I said, the Rebbe himself. That does not necessarily console, but it gives strength. And everyone should have strength in this regard. Going right along from one difficult topic to another, autism, special children. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, where do children and adults with autism fit into the Torah? And does Chassidus say anything about them? And also, what is the Rebbe's perspective on them? I really enjoy your classes, especially as a supplement to learning Chassidus inside the Sefer. Question number 2. I just discovered that I'm expecting a special child, a child with special needs, I should say. I'm devastated and feel guilty for feeling this way. Do you have any words of comfort to offer my family? Let's begin with the autism. There's a clip from the Dollars with Cantor Malavani, Joseph Malavani, a cantor in the 5th Annual Synagogue, where he goes by the Rebbe, and he tells the Rebbe that they're going to London, where his son is in a special school for autism, who has severe autism. So he's in a special home, I should say. I don't know if school, home. And he asked the Rebbe for a bracha. So the Rebbe suddenly says the following words. He says, they say about autism, I don't know if the Rebbe words the word autism, they say about this, that child does not have any social bonding and connections to anyone. The Rebbe says, with people he does not have connections, but he has direct connection with God. He speaks and connects to God because he doesn't have humans in the way, so it's a special connection with God. So the Rebbe says. And then Malavani says to the Rebbe, yeah, it's true. When we gave him the Arba Kamfas, tzitzis, he cherishes them and other Jewish things. So the Rebbe said, there's there a pushkin in his room. Make sure there's a tzedakah pushkin, you should give tzedakah. What you see from this, and you see from other letters from the Rebbe, this again goes into the area of painful situations. But let's get beyond that. If a child is born that way, and that's what God sent, the word special children is not a patronizing cliche. It's real. Chassidus speaks about Loshen Saginar. In the Gemara, this Loshen Saginar. What's Loshen Saginar? Loshen Saginar is when you say something and it's like almost humorous. Why? Because Saginar means a name that you give for someone who's blind. Saginar means with abundant light. When it's the opposite, they live in darkness. So Chassidus asks the question, how could you say that? How could you say something so disturbing, calling someone blind, like saying, oh wow, there's no one that sees as well as you do? And Chassidus answers in a number of places, including Ayin Beis, that that's the truth. A person who's blind actually has more light. The problem is they don't have the veils in the eye that allow the light to be channeled and filtered so they can see. So it's like someone blinded by the light. This is what special children are about. And it's not meant to be some type of consolation or saying, oh, they're really better. It means that God would not send a child here without some type of uniqueness. And if something is taken from one area, they have strength in another area. You see this with children, especially with Down syndrome, the love that they give off. It's understanding the power of a soul and its connection to God no matter what. Obviously, we would rather be healthy. But don't ever think that that child does not have a divine connection. And very often it's our own projections of what we are proud of or ashamed of. Many parents are ashamed of a child like that. It reflects bad on them. Oh, this child is not well. This child is not complete like the rest of us. Loving parents who are secure embrace the child and find that deeper love and deeper connection, the specialness. And that's what the Rebbe is saying, that autistic child has a connection. Now, why God created it that way, I cannot answer, no one can answer. There's a very powerful letter from the Rebbe to someone who deals with special children, and the Rebbe says, it's very critical. The one working with special children has to believe in the specialness, because it's not just a word. It really means special of their soul. And if they don't believe in them, they should not work with these children, because children will sense those that are not confident and secure and believe in them. It's pretty strong words. So my answer to the question about autism, the Torah speaks about, obviously, the anomalies and different situations where you don't have a regular, quote-unquote, healthy child that fits into the mold. It's understanding that sometimes we have to adapt and discover deeper strengths in the most challenging and darkest places. I do not wish it on anyone. But if it happens, you can learn to find deeper love and deeper connections. As far as the one that's expecting a child, special needs, I do not think it's something that's easy to deal with on your own. I think it's important, not just with your spouse, but also with some support group or people who've gone through this, because we give each other strength. I cannot tell you not to be devastated, but I could tell you not to be guilty. There's nothing to be guilty about. You did nothing wrong. Why God chooses this? He chooses. What you have to figure out is how to make sure that the love, do not be affected by other people's attitudes, by other people's nebach, feeling that there's something wrong with you or your child. You're going to have to learn to give your child strength and make the child feel secure. The fact of the matter is, without question, though we may not be able to change certain chromosomes and certain DNA makeup and certain handicaps, but we can give our children dignity and love that they deserve, that way they can walk with their heads up high, even if they have a handicap or they have another deficiency, and recognize that they do have something special. It's hard. I know it's hard. It's far easier to say, okay, here, child, everything is well, and now let's express the specialness. It's far harder when you see a Down syndrome child, a child with some type of maybe mental diminishment, or challenges of other sorts, the autism. But the dignity and love you give the soul of the child will come back. Some way to benefit the child. Again, will it heal everything? But it will express a uniqueness that this child has. And that's the obligation we have as parents, is not to just simply say, oh, what can I do? Say Kapitel Tilim. That's fine, but you have to teach that child dignity. Teach your family to embrace the child. There's nothing to be ashamed of. God sent children to this world of different sorts. Everyone has their uniqueness. And special children have their special uniqueness. The challenge is to get beyond the impression, the image, and so on. Obviously, it's difficult. And again, I wish upon everyone to have only healthy children. It should only be that way. But when it does come these challenges, we cannot allow ourselves to succumb and to become defeatist, feel defeated or feel fatalistic. We have to rise to the occasion and embrace. And sometimes we need friends, or not so sometimes, always friends that can help us get to that place. So that's what I advise and suggest. God should bless everybody, that they should only have a life that has the least amount of bumps and obstacles, something that goes smooth and free in a way that we can just live up to our potential. But very often many people, so-called healthy people, also build all kinds of man-made demons and man-made handicaps. So my blessing is, on this episode 45 of MyLife, Chassidus Applied, that God should bless everyone, especially in this month of Kislev, which is the month of light, and the end of the month is Hanukkah. It's a Chassidish month. What better month for Chassidus Applied? The Tes Kislev, as I mentioned, Tes Kislev, Yud Kislev, the Alter Rebbe, the Rebbe Rasha, the Mittler Rebbe's Chag HaGeula, the Mittler Rebbe's birthday and Yartzeit on the same day, Tes Kislev, and ultimately that we should use this month, and every one of us, no matter what strengths we have, no matter what challenges we have, can use our abilities. And everyone is entitled to the dignity of being created b'tzelem Elokim. Everyone has that tzelem Elokim, including the autistic child, including the mentally handicapped child, including the special child of any sort. And that not respecting that, you're essentially defiling and disgracing the tzelem Elokim of your child. That's how we have to look at it. Is it challenging? Yes, it's challenging, but that's how we have to address it. And for that matter, addressing everyone we meet. You meet people. The Gemara says the person who met the fellow in the street, and he says, Kama muchur, look how ugly you are. And he said to him, Lech, go to the Uman Shasani, to the craftsman, to the engineer that shaped me, that crafted me. God is the creator of every person, and that's by virtue of that, that's why we have dignity. Not because we look good in the mirror, or we look good to others, or because everything is functioning. We all have our flaws, but we also have our strengths. And God should bless those that have unique challenges. Remember, everyone is given the amount of strength they need to face any challenge that comes their way. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied, episode 45. Until next week, Sunday from 8 to 9, everyone should have a very blessed week, a lichtige week, a Chassidische week.